Hello, this is Brian Quann. I'm going to talk a little bit about selection for digitization today. In Archives and Special Collection, we're talking about the transformation of analog physical materials into online content and the decisions that go into that and how things get prioritized. I got interested in this in the readings this semester as kind of a chance for the archives to do a second pass at selection and appraisal, and not necessarily choosing what gets acquired by the archive, but what goes online. It's kind of a way to do that process over again. So some of the basic aspects of selection for digitization are summarized in this 2009 article. The authors have summarized the experiences of several institutions and put their concerns for criteria into several categories, most important of which are institutional framework. Do these materials fit our mission? Are there copyright problems with the materials? The value of the material, are they academically worthwhile to have online? Are people actually using these materials? Will more people use them if they are online? Would putting them online reduce wear on the originals? That's kind of a preservation angle. Would putting them online increase access by removing geographical obstacles to your archive? And then, of course, there are cost issues with scanning, creating metadata, and the preservation materials going forward. So these are all things that the archive must consider in making these decisions. Beyond those basic criteria, you can look at a user-centric strategy. Proactive would be looking at your user statistics to see which materials are heavily used and thus good candidates for digitization. Reactive involves things like digitization on demand, where patrons will ask for a copy of a physical material, and you think that if they want a copy of it, there are probably other people that want a copy of it, so putting that online would be a strategy to fulfill user demand. There are crowdsourcing elements where you actually have the patrons do some of the scanning, and I know NARA does some of that. Problems with these approaches can be that you skew your collection towards what several heavy users want to see, which may not be a comprehensive view of your institutional mission, and they may not be as concerned about copyright as you would be as an institution. A very micro look at these user-centered strategies is the Southern Illinois University Carbondale. They took 2 years of in-person and online requests for the university archives. They found which resource would match those requests best, tabulated those into a table, and provided that for other university archives as a method for determining which materials might be the best to digitize first. And you see that there. Of course, archives don't have enough money to digitize everything they want, so they're always going to have to look for outside money to drive these digitization programs, and priority will be given to those which are likely to attract money or have funding. So you see in these quotes from the articles, visibility for investors or expected revenues, impromptu funders, traditional funding sources may not be sufficient, and that's NARA talking there, so even the big guys don't have enough money to do what they want. They have partnerships with genealogical research companies to pay for a lot of their projects. The bottom two are universities, and they want to meet interest of funding agency and have the potential to attract funding. So everyone is looking for a revenue source to do these digitization programs, and that can lead to some ethical issues, as we will see. The Manzich article takes on some of these ethical considerations where archives are constantly having to ask for money for digitization, so they're outsourcing these decisions on selection to people with the money. This has been a problem in archives historically, where money and power determines what gets saved and what gets remembered. And we don't want to reflect that same pattern in the online world that exists in the analog world. Minority groups have recently moved towards creating our community archives, and while this is a great development, they're not going to be nearly as visible online as these institutional archives, so it's important to keep in mind minority viewpoints. Now on the right here we have a macro look at the digitization of African materials, where the author states, clearly the selection of content will reflect dominant and mainstream positions which are rooted in neocolonial and patriarchal arrangements, thereby excluding marginal voices. So the important lesson for takeaway here for archivists is to not let money make all of your selection decisions for you, and to try to keep some kind of balance in the collection. And lastly here we have a couple of organizations that are being active in their digitization programs to kind of redress some historical inaccuracies. LSU on the left has inclusion criteria to operationalize anti-racism and make a more balanced collection. And Duke on the right is digitizing materials that have a focus on diversity and inclusion as a priority. In summary, all archives are going to be short on money for digitization programs and will need to look to users and external funding as a way to direct their resources. The important thing will be to not let the mission of the institution go astray, to maintain balance, and not let outside money determine the narrative of the materials. Thank you.